There are situations where mandatory minimums are relevant. You know, the Liberal Party of the past in government brought in mandatory minimums around serious crimes like murder. But at the same time, there is a general sense, reinforced by the Supreme Court decision today, that mandatory minimums brought in by the previous government in a number of cases went too far.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Happy Friday. The Supreme Court struck down 2 sentencing laws today. In separate rulings, the top court delivered a blow to the previous government's criminal justice reforms. In the first case, the court found that a mandatory sentence of 1 year in jail for a drug offense violates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They said it casts too wide a net, treating small-time drug peddlers the same as criminal gangs. And in a second case, the court struck down a measure that limited credit for time served prior to sentencing. So what do these decisions say about the Conservative so-called tough-on-crime approach? And what will it mean for this government going forward? Will this mark the beginning of an unraveling of 10 years of crime reforms? Joining me now in Edmonton, Michael Cooper. He's the Conservative Deputy Justice Critic. Here with me in studio, Sean Casey, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice, and Sheila Malcolmson, she's the NDP's Status of Women Critic. Good to see everybody. Appreciate you making time before you jet off to your ridings, or not in your case, Michael, but we'll talk to you from your riding. Okay, so obviously the Supreme Court decision affects legislation brought in by the former Conservative government as part of its tough-on-crime agenda. How do you feel about the court's ruling, Michael Cooper, given that it basically says that the mandatory minimums that were put in place in particular just don't make sense and aren't constitutional?
Well, I'm disappointed with the Supreme Court's decision. Canadians are concerned about crime, and that's why our previous Conservative government brought forward more than 30 measures to strengthen Canada's justice system, to stand up for victims, and to keep our streets and communities safe. We have to obviously respect the decision of the court, but I'm hopeful that the government responds in a way that reflects Canadians' desire to see that drug dealers and organized criminals are held accountable.
But on this issue, the mandatory minimums and the credit for time served, doesn't it show that the previous government, and I realize you weren't a part of it, but you are still a member of that party, was overreaching?
Well, the Supreme Court has issued its decision, but I make no apologies for the important measures that the previous Conservative government brought in to hold criminals accountable. Canadians lose faith in the criminal justice system when the punishment doesn't fit the crime, and that's why we eliminate it.
If the punishment can't be upheld, what's the point?
Well, we have to respond to the decision, but certainly it is a disappointing decision.
Okay, so Sean Casey, how will the government respond? Because I guess you have a couple of choices now. You can rewrite the law in order to make mandatory minimums work, or you can scrap it altogether. What are you going to do?
What we're going to do is actually contained in the mandate letter of the minister, and that is to do a comprehensive review of the criminal code that will include a review of mandatory minimum sentences. That hasn't been done since the 1980s, and these multiple crime bills and these piecemeal additions to the criminal code haven't served us well. It's time to take a look at the efficiency and the effectiveness and the charter compliance of all of the code, and that is in the minister's mandate letter. So it's something that's going to happen over the course of the next few months and possibly years, but it will happen within this mandate. But it's a comprehensive as opposed to a one-of type of approach.
Fine, but what is the Liberals' general position on mandatory minimums? They make sense in some instances or never?
There is a place for mandatory minimums, but that place isn't everywhere. Mandatory minimums should be used in the most serious of offenses, but always with an eye to charter compliance.
And when the court says that they sometimes cast too wide a net, and I think in particular that they are looking for judges to have some discretion in sentencing, is that something that the government is comfortable with?
Not only comfortable with, it's something that we've advocated for both in opposition and will continue to seek to preserve in government through the comprehensive review. There are a lot of tools for protecting victims other than longer jail sentences. That seemed to be lost on the previous Conservatives, and that is something that the Supreme Court continues to remind them, and that's something that we're going to actively pursue.
Okay, Sheila Malcolmson, what do you make of the Supreme Court's decisions and what it says about whether mandatory minimums can be applied too broadly, I guess?
I really applaud the civil society organizations that really push this, BC Civil Liberties Association in particular. We wouldn't have got into this trouble at all, either the people affected or the cost of defending this in court, if the previous Conservative government had upheld the previous practice of always subjecting its legislation to a charter test. And my understanding is that towards the end of the term, there was no consideration of that whatsoever. So it's a problem.
So, Michael Cooper, what do you say then when Sean Casey says that there are other ways to protect victims? It doesn't have to be all just through mandatory minimums. Do you have concerns that perhaps offenders won't be adequately punished then?
Well, mandatory minimums are an important tool to ensure that criminals are held accountable. It doesn't take away the discretion of judges to apply the law to the facts of each individual case. It is merely a recognition that for certain types of offenses, at a very minimum, a specific sentence is appropriate. We have to look at this decision, and I'm not suggesting that disregarding the fact that we do have a Supreme Court decision that does have to be respected. But the fact of the matter is that our Conservative government, over the 10 years that it was in office, took important measures to deal with gangs, to deal with organized crime, to deal with those involved in drug trafficking who prey upon people with addictions for profit. And I hope that the government will continue to move in that direction to hold those types of criminals accountable. I believe that that's what the vast majority of Canadians want.
Except it's not, again, what the Supreme Court will allow. So, I mean, there was obviously, again, to use that language, some overreach in what the Conservatives were trying to do. And if you were tough on crime but can't keep people behind bars, I'm not sure that it matters in any substantive way.
Yeah. Well, we need to look at the decision, and the government needs to respond accordingly, and I certainly need some time. The decision was just released today to review the decision in some detail.
Okay, so Sean Casey, when you say there are other ways to protect victims beyond mandatory minimums, what kinds of things would the government consider, or what kinds of things are you considering, particularly when dealing with this particular offense as regards to serious drug trafficking?
Well, this is something that will form part of the comprehensive review, but one of the things that's mentioned in the mandate letter is restorative justice. There's been an awful lot of talk about upstream solutions. Look, every single academic who has studied mandatory minimums, who has studied longer jail sentences, would take issue with the proposition that longer jail sentences result in fewer victims. So if this is really about victims and not vengeance, we need a completely different focus.
How long is this review going to take, though? Because if the Supreme Court is going to be working through many of the pieces of legislation that the Conservatives put in place, and they've struck down many of those pieces of legislation, do you really need all this time to review it, or can you not just start making some substantive changes?
I think that we would fall into the exact same trap as the Conservatives if we responded to every single court decision with another amendment to the criminal code. That's exactly what we're not going to do. So we're going to take the time that's required to do it right, to do it in a comprehensive fashion, something that hasn't been done since the 1980s.
That's going to take a long time.
It's not going to take days, it's going to take months and even beyond. You're right, it is going to take a long time. It's a big project, but it needs to be done, and that's in the mandate, and that's what we'll be doing.
Sheila Malcolmson?
Yeah. New Democrat senses that Liberals got a mandate to roll back these very damaging changes that the Conservative government made, and we would have hoped that they would be acting already. Now they've got a little extra impetus from the courts. There's a real human cost to this. Now, I've heard from mothers who were considered to be an accessory to the crime. Maybe they drove the getaway car on a petty burglary associated with drug addiction. They no longer are able to appeal to a judge to say, let me serve consecutive sentencing on weekends. They may lose custody of their children. That's family impact for life, forever for those kids. And so I urge my Liberal colleagues to move quickly on this. There's human cost, and now the court has spoken loudly on this.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, everybody. Michael Cooper, Sean Casey, and Sheila Malcolmson. Thanks. You just